Hello friends. So in today's session, we'll talk about humanistic approach to counseling and therapy. You would have already covered some of the major approaches to counseling that include behavioristic approach, psychodynamic approach, existential approach. Humanistic approach is also one of the prominent approaches, and in today's session, we'll talk about the meaning of humanistic therapy and the techniques. So we'll first discuss the basic view of human nature from humanistic perspective, wherein we'll try to understand that how do they see human nature. The second thing that we'll try to understand is the basic process of counseling from the humanistic approach. And the third objective of this module is to understand techniques, if any, that are being used by humanistic psychologists or humanistic counselors. So let's take each objective one by one. If you look at the foundation of humanistic approach, there are two major contributors, Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers. Now, Abraham Maslow's need hierarchy theory of motivation is very popular, and it is something which is not only used in counseling and psychotherapy, but also in organizational context, also in motivation and personality development, etc. Then we have Carl Rogers' contribution. Carl Rogers has given person-centered approach to therapy. So his approach is called person-centered approach. Initially it was called client-centered approach, but gradually he refined it to name it as person-centered approach to therapy. So you can see these two people, Abraham Maslow and Carl Rogers, as the two pillars of the humanistic psychology. So these two are the pillars of the humanistic movement. And the humanistic approach in psychology, it came as a major movement which was against the existing perspectives in psychology, which was predominantly positivistic. So the positivistic paradigm was very deterministic. It used to see therapy as a cure of illness. So they would think of therapy not as a process of growth and change, but as a process of curing the illness. They also viewed human nature as very different. They viewed humans as irrational. They viewed humans as people who are prone to mental stress and disorders because of their inherent lacks. So humanistic approach came in opposition to the positivistic approach, or you can say the lack-based approach. While when we look at the humanistic approach, it is not deterministic, it is choice focused. So it doesn't say that human beings are the victims of their circumstances. The humanistic approach would rather say that we all human beings have choice in our lives. It is more present focused. Then the therapy is not seen as filling some gap or lacuna or deficit in the individual. Therapy is seen as a process of growth, as a process of actualization, as a process of self-realization. So therapy is seen as a healing process which helps individuals grow and move toward their self-actualization. So here the view of human nature that is taken up by humanistic psychologists is that human beings are inherently good, positive, worthy. So they are full of a lot of potentials. Unlike the earlier approaches like the behavioristic approach or the psychoanalytic approach, which used to think of individuals as either the victim of their circumstances, determined completely by their past, influenced completely by their unconscious, or determined by the environment in which they stay. On the other hand, when we look at the humanistic approach gives a lot of importance to agency, to personhood, to individuals' ability to make choices in life. So now let us see what exactly is the view of human nature according to the humanistic approach to counseling. Now, as we said, that it views humans as inherently good and worthy. It views humans as inherently positive and health-oriented and growth-oriented. So it has a very positive and very, so to say, hopeful view of human nature, right? People know inherently what is best for them. So that is another belief that, human beings would know on their own what is really good for them. We all know that, somewhere in our inside world, there is a voice that keeps guiding us, and tells us what is right or what is good for us. So that is another assumption about human nature, that people know what is inherently best for them. The third assumption or the third view is that people are continuously moving towards becoming the best versions of themselves, which basically means that we all have this force of growth, we all have this force of actualization, and individuals are not those people who are directed towards destruction, but individuals are, or human beings are, those who are motivated towards constructing something or creating something new and beautiful and becoming the better version of themselves. So therefore, in terms of the primary motive or drive that individuals have or human beings have, they call it the actualization or the self-actualizing tendency. So that means every individual, the life can be seen as a journey of growth, a journey of transformation, a journey of fulfilling our potentials, recognizing our potentials and fulfilling them, and actualizing all those things within us that we can possibly be. So that is the beauty of the humanistic approach to therapy. Then another important assumption or view that they have regarding human nature is the organismic valuing process, which means that inner voice that human beings have within them, that basically tells them what is good, what is healthy, what is best for them. So organismically, organically, we know what is good for us, what is going to be adaptive for us, and what is going to be maladaptive for us. So when you are confronted with some kind of a difficult choice, like, whether I can smoke cigarette or whether I can have alcohol or something like that, I'm sure somewhere in your inner world, you would have a voice which would say that it is not healthy. So that is the organismic valuing process, where we inherently, deeply from within ourselves know what is going to be best for us. And the last view is that the therapy is a process through which the individual is going to discover themselves, find themselves. So it is basically, you can say that the focus of therapy in the humanistic approach is on the individual self. And that is why Rogers' theory is called the person-centered approach to counseling or therapy. So the focus is on the individual, the focus is on the self, and the focus is on how an individual tries to find meaning and purpose in life. The focus is also on how every individual wants to be understood and accepted by themselves as well as others. So that is the basic view which shapes the, the understanding of the entire humanistic approach to counseling or therapy. So the next part is, what is the reason for the distress that we experience in our day-to-day life? What is the cause of the psychological problems that we face in our day-to-day life? So, according to the humanistic approach as given by Carl Rogers, person-centered counseling, there is the concept of incongruence that is at the basis of any distress or problem or mental health challenge that an individual experiences. So this incongruence is between how an individual perceives himself and what the individual actually truly is. So here you can see on one side we have talked about the self concept, which is basically how you look at yourself, which is basically how you understand yourself, define yourself. So that is your perception about yourself. And then at another level, you are a set of experiences. So I might have a set of different experiences, but my self-concept might be different. For example, I might be experiencing a lot of distrust against somebody, But in my self-concept, maybe because of my conditioning, I have placed for myself that I am a very trusting individual, right? So what would happen is that in experience, in reality, I am somewhere feeling a lot of mistrust against someone, but my self-concept is saying, no, I'm not like that. How can I experience mistrust, right? Because the self-concept is something which is shaped by the forces of conditioning, which is shaped by our parents, our teachers, our culture, our society. So what we think we are and what we truly are. If there is gap between the two, we are in a state of incongruence. And if we are in a state of incongruence, that is going to lead to a lot of other psychological challenges in the individual's life. The individual will never be at ease because there would always be a sense of not being fulfilled. There would always be a sense of not being at ease with oneself, with not being rooted in oneself. Because experientially, I am something else. In reality, I am experiencing something else. But what I think, how I'm representing that is very different. So the greater the incongruence, so you can see in this particular diagram that the overlap part is very little, which means everything that the individual is experiencing is not coming to the conscious awareness of this individual and therefore not getting represented in the form of their understanding of their self. So how they are defining themselves, so I might define myself as an exceptional, wonderful teacher, but in reality, I might be actually feeling that no, I'm not that good enough, or vice versa. Or I might say that, I have I am a very bright student and I really like studying because it was somewhere forced on me by my sibling or by my parents. But in experience, I actually feel that I would rather prefer to play something or I would rather prefer sports than studying. So then there would be greater degree of incongruence, and this incongruence is going to lead to distress. So now, before understanding congruence and incongruence and the conception of psychological breakdown, let me tell you a story. This story I'm sure you would have heard in your childhood. It is of an elephant named Rupa. So it's a story of Rupa Hathi. So Rupa Hathi is there as a part of a jungle, and where children on every Sunday come to watch the various animals and visit the jungle, a kind of a jungle safari on the elephant. So Rupa would look forward to the children coming every Sunday because they would sit on Rupa's back and then they would take the tour. Now, when they would take the tour of the entire jungle and watching all the animals, Rupa would notice that they would admire the stripes of the zebra, or the colors of the peacock's feather, or the parrot's beak of red color, or the lion's mane, or the tiger's glowing skin. But the children would never appreciate Rupa. And Rupa would always feel that, I am somebody who is not good, I'm somebody who is very dark in complexion and very heavy and not beautiful and not admirable. So after this kept happening for a long time, Rupa started crying. When Rupa started crying, its friend, which was a bird named Chichi, said that, why are you crying? And then Rupa told about his issue. He said that, these kids come and they don't admire me for anything, but they all find beauty everywhere except me. So then Chichi, because she was a good friend, got very concerned and said, wait, I'll find out a solution. So she went to every animal in the jungle and she requested that our friend Rupa is very distressed because of this reason. So they said that, okay, fine, we will give Rupa a part of her skin color, a part of her beauty to make it beautiful. So Rupa was given a very bright skin by the tiger, or the lion gave its mane, or the the trunk of Rupa got red in color because the parrot gave the red color, and the peacock gave all the beautiful color feathers and all that, and Rupa got everything on itself. And then he started eagerly waiting for the children to come on a Sunday. On Sunday, when the children came, they refused to, ride on Rupa for taking the jungle safari, and they all were shocked to see Rupa. Some of them were also afraid, and some of them started laughing at Rupa. Now Rupa again was very confused that now I have got all the beauty and everything that they used to admire, still I am not being recognized, still I am not being accepted. Then it struck Rupa that maybe if I remove all these things, they would recognize me and then they would ride on me. So Rupa goes into the pool and washes off all the things that it had borrowed from his animal friends and comes out. And once Rupa is in its original form, the children, welcome him back and they take the ride on his back. Now, in this story, what is the lesson, what is the moral, is basically that how we are as individuals, how we authentically, truly, naturally are, that is the best way to be. So being ourself, being our true, real self is something which is the healthiest way of life, because even if we try to imbibe things from others and try to ape things or try to conform to others, if we lose the essence of our true self, we are not going to experience peace, mental health, happiness in life. Now, I hope you understood this story. Now, let me tell you the conception of psychological background as happens according to the person-centered approach to counseling. Now, on the left-hand side, you can see that we have written things in green color, and on the right-hand side, we have written in pink color. So you can see that on one side, we are talking about field of total experiences. We are talking about organismic self, then actualizing tendency, then organismic valuing process. What would happen is I might experience a lot of things, but I might not have the language, the necessary words to represent that experience, right? And we all know that language is shaped by culture and society at large. So what gets represented in memory, what gets represented as self-concept would depend on whether I have the necessary tool to represent it, the necessary tool to symbolize it. Also, my environment plays a part here, because what I learn to value and what I learn to ignore. So I might have a lot of experiences, but my environment tells me that this is something which is valuable, which you have to, represent or make a part of yourself, and this is something which is not allowed. So that is how this self-concept gets formed, and it is basically motivated by the society-based actualization. So what the society is wanting us to do. A very good example for students would be the choice of career, for example. So I might have a very artistic side to me, wherein my organismic self feels very creative and artistic and passionate about pursuing a particular art field. But when I am growing up, when I see others, I see that academic achievement is emphasized more, is celebrated more, right? So that means, in my understanding, maybe my creative side did not get as much appreciation by my parents or by my significant others as compared to my academic achievement. So what would happen is that in my self-concept, I would tend to ignore my creative aspect of my true self, and I would represent or symbolize the academic achievement side of my personality. So that becomes a part of self-concept. Self as one perceives it. So how I see myself, because I was not valued for a creative person, I was valued for getting the first rank in the class. So in my self-concept, I am a high achiever, right? So this motivation then is no longer actualizing or the sense of actualization that we have, but it becomes based on society and what society regards as good, as worthy, as successful, right? So what happens is that now the individual will start valuing themselves on the basis of the conditions of worth that is laid down by the society. So if the society says that you are a good girl or you are a good boy, if you follow this, if you do this, if you are obedient to your parents, if you are getting good marks, if you are being appreciated by your teachers, that becomes a kind of a valuing which is based on conditions of worth. So what the individual would understand, that if I study, I'll be valued more. If I play, I would not be valued, right? So even if inherently I want to play, or inherently I want to go in sports, or inherently I want to pursue a creative, artistic side, I will not do it because my society is giving me another message, right? So therefore, rather than giving unconditional positive regard to myself, I would start valuing myself only when I fulfill certain criteria or meet certain conditions. So I am good enough only when my parents are happy. I am good enough only when I am securing the 95% of marks. I am good enough only when I obey all that my parents say. I am good enough only when I am not causing any kind of, I am not questioning the society's norms in any way, right? So then what happens? On one side, we are giving ourselves conditional based regard, respect, acceptance. On the other hand, we are giving it unconditional regard and acceptance. So when we give conditional based regard and acceptance, it leads to the development of an ideal self, or the self concept that we take from outside. And if we give unconditional regard without any judgment, without accepting as we are, it is called unconditional positive self regard, and it leads to the development of the real self, that is what you truly are. Then if you look at, if suppose there is a greater gap between what you truly are and how you represent yourself, or what your ideal self becomes, it would be greater incongruence. And when there is greater incongruence, in any kind of threatening situations, you would face a lot of anxiety, and then that anxiety, you will defend against that anxiety either through denial or distortion, which basically means that you would try to say no, it doesn't exist, or you would try to distort the reality. No, I'm okay with it, I'm not, this is a minor thing, I'll be able to handle it, or whatever. So there would be defensive approach from your side, which would further increase the incongruence, and as the incongruence increases, it would eventually lead to the breakdown of the individual. So that is how they understand psychological breakdown. Now let us see what are the basic goals of therapy. So this is the backdrop of the humanistic approach. The goals of therapy, it is basically helping the client accept themselves, so who they truly are, and move towards growth, right? So the specific goals of therapy would be decreasing the level of incongruence, because greater the incongruence, greater is the distress. So the first goal is to decrease the level of incongruence. You are helping the individual strive for actualization, because that is their inherent motivation tendency. You increase the person's openness to experience. So you are not making the person close to certain experiences because the society is saying, or because the parents are saying something, but you are trying to help the person explore and become more open to experiences, getting in touch with their organismic valuing process, which is like who they truly are, and then developing as a fully functioning individual, which is like when you are living authentically. So to attain these goals, there are certain techniques. Now, before moving on to the techniques, I would like to emphasize that humanistic approach doesn't give a comprehensive set of techniques. It relies more on the attitude and personal philosophy of the counselor. So it is more to do with the being of the counselor. So the counselor is the basic tool of change. The client-counselor relationship is the basic tool of change or therapeutic change to take place. And what is important is the willingness of the counselor to engage with the client in a genuine fashion, right? So Rogers has given 3 core techniques, or you can say 3 basic minimal conditions that are required for counseling to take place, which is emphasizing basically the being of the counselor, the personality of the counselor. The first thing is the therapist's congruence or genuineness. So can the therapist be themselves? Is the therapist authentic or not? If the therapist is playing a role, if the therapist is hiding behind masks, then the presence of the therapist will not be enough to create that space for change to take place. So that is the first thing, that whether the therapist is genuine, authentic, is able to express all that he or she is experiencing. So there is a congruence between the inside and the outside. The second important technique, you can say, is empathetic understanding, which is trying to understand the situation from the perspective of others, but without losing, as if they were your own, but without losing the as if quality. So I try to put myself in the shoes of the other as if they were my own, but without losing the as if quality, which basically means that I'm not completely identifying with the emotion of the other. I'm still maintaining some kind of objective distance from my client's experiences, yet I am connected to them in some way. So I am trying to understand what they are going through, but at the same time, I am keeping my third eye of the counselor open, right? And the last one is the unconditional positive regard, which basically means that you are giving unconditional, non-judgmental kind of an environment of acceptance to your client. So your client feels free to talk about anything in front of the counselor, because the counselor is non-judgmental, because the counselor is not going to judge me for my bad behavior, for me not getting good marks, for me shouting against my parents or something like that, right? So that is the basic thing, and that can be done through the use of non-judgmental language or non-expert language. So if the counselor comes across as a very rigid person, as somebody who is playing the role of a counselor who knows everything, perhaps there would be an inhibition on the part of the client to share. So use of non-expert, non-judgmental language, invitations for repair. So checking with the client, am I all right in understanding? Clarifying with the client, use of tentative language, like perhaps you're going through this, or maybe we can understand this from this perspective. So perhaps, maybe, these are tentative words that can be used by the counselor. Focus is on the present, not on the past. So more emphasis on the present moment. Using signals of closeness, which is like referring to the client as we. So we will do it together. We will now, take the first step towards healing. Making eye contact, calling the person by their first name, all that will show that you are willing to communicate to the client. It can also be making use of self-disclosure on the part of the counselor, where the counselor might talk about a little bit about their own life so that the client also opens up. So that is another technique. Active listening is one of the major technique of the humanistic approach, because it is all about having the dialogue with the client, with the counselor. So that involves reflection of feelings. So if your client is feeling sad, you can't have a smiling face, right? So it is very important that you mirror, that you reflect the emotions of your client, and that all comes under other communication skills, which means that you need to paraphrase what your client is saying, because paraphrase means that you are telling what the client has said in your own words, so that the client feels that I am being understood. Reflection of feelings, mirroring of emotions, summarizing whatever the client has said, affirmation of client's strength and value. So if you find something very beautiful in your client, you talk about it, you affirm it. So all these things are other techniques, but again, I would like to emphasize that this is not a predominantly a technique-based approach. It relies more on the relationship between the client and the counselor, which is based on unconditional positive regard, genuineness, and empathy. Thank you so much for listening.